Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast. We are, as always, very, very excited to have you with us on this final episode of season 6. I can't believe it is the final episode, but it is. And like I said, we are thrilled to have you with us. This is Riley, welcoming you to the show. And as I always do, I'm going to say hello to my fantastical, wonderful, super fragilistic. I don't know. I got to come up with a fragilistic, but that didn't quite work out the way I meant it. But my amazing co-host, Tova. Welcome to the show, Tova. How are you on this last episode of season 6? What's going on?
It's the last episode of season 6. It is September, which I don't know how that happened.
Like lightning, it happened.
Like lightning. Yeah. I am, it's hard to say. I have been experiencing some never-ending hangover vacation drama as it relates to my car, and so otherwise I'd be really good. Really good. But that is there all the time, and yes. So I've had my rental car so long that I need to put air in the tires. I just got a notification this morning that I need air in the tires, and right. Which is also am I breaking this car too? Why do you need air in the tires? But also, why have I had it so long that I need to put air in the tires?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But it's we're recording this. You'll be listening to it after Labor Day. We're recording this before Labor Day, and I find this time of year, specifically right now, incredibly confusing. Because I love summer, but also I really love the seasons. And so there's always a point in any season, even the one that I love so much, even summer and fall, that I'm ready for the next one.
Yeah.
Even if I don't want to let go of the last one. And so it's September, but it's Labor Day weekend. And is Labor Day the beginning of the fall or the end of the summer? And I don't know. And I just don't know what to do. I want to bake some sort of pumpkin bread and go to the beach.
It's an interesting thing to notice about the transition between seasons, because I think, and this may be a topic that we'll cover some other time in some other season, but it's something that I think we all feel when it comes to change in general, and it's that difficulty in letting go of the old and stepping into the new, right? Because there are things about the old that are fantastic and we love and we don't want to let go of, and there's memories we made and there were moments that were amazing and things that are so comforting and comfortable, and then there's excitement about what's coming and things we're looking forward to and we want to enjoy, and one of the things that is the hardest is being present in the moment and enjoying the today of it all. But I think maybe we'll talk about that in another season and another episode, because it's true, and it's such a the seasons themselves are such a useful tool for understanding that experience, because it's such if you live in a place where there are seasons, it's such an in-your-face experience of that happening, right? Because it's so literal.
Yeah, and I think that I saw some tweet or meme or something years ago at this point, where a man was joking about his wife from New Jersey, and he was saying that they've lived in Chicago, there for years, but he's when she dies and goes to heaven, she'll be yeah, it's nice, but it doesn't have the seasons like New Jersey has. We do really live in a place that I've joked now. So I've lived in New Jersey for a long time, a shockingly long time. And for someone who's not from here, and New Jersey doesn't do anything halfway. at all. And so
Right.
even the seasons are like, yeah, it's the season, whatever the season is. But I think that's a good point about, and this will, I think we can slowly get this into the topic of the day, but this, I think this is a good point about like figuring out what it is from the other season that you might miss. And it's always a helpful reminder for me in September to go to the ocean and just
Mm-hmm.
like to remind myself that it doesn't disappear when I'm not there on the
Yeah.
regular basis. Like it's
Yep.
still there. You can still go there and walk on like in the ocean in the cold, which I love to do. Like, but
Yeah.
it's I always need to plan a September beach day to like remind myself that it's still there. And I think that that goes to that sort of theory of, even any change rarely is a change so abrupt that there aren't things from the past that you can hold on to or bring with you. um and all of these like feelings of feeling so many things at once, like in hindsight, the vacation with this car issue was an incredibly lovely, relaxing vacation and also an incredibly stressful experience. And I was talking to my kids. So today is the day, actually, as you're listening to this, that will be my kids' first day of school because we don't start forever. And so I was talking to my oldest who's starting middle school this year. I said, there's this new word, and it was somebody quoting Glennon Doyle. So like, I don't know who quoted her, and I don't know when she's used this word, but it's the word skited, which is like scared and excited. And I told him that, and he was like, "Is that like a real word?" Which, of course, was the question that he asked. And I was like,
Right.
"No, but does it matter? Like, they're all made up. All the words are made up." And I think that that's something that is a common feeling. And I oftentimes ask the boys, like, on a scale of 1 being nervous and 10 being excited, like, where are you? Like, and there's kind of the assumption that you're going to be nervous and excited unless you're an extreme, but like, where are you on that scale? Because I think it's important to realize that oftentimes we have these two feelings all happening at the same time, which is interesting because we're going to talk about busyness, and that's like that to me that is like internal busyness. Like when I have all of the feelings and I'm like, I don't know which one to lean into. Like,
Yeah, it becomes like this whirlwind inside you, right?
yeah.
And it's hard to kind of latch on to anything at that point where it's just sort of I don't know, we call it the hamster wheel in my house where you're just sort
Yeah.
of chugging along on the hamster wheel and you can't get off and think about any one thing. You're just chasing everything
And
all at
that's
the same
sort of
time.
this topic this week is right is talking about like basically how to step off the hamster wheel, and
Right.
whether it's setting boundaries for yourself or setting boundaries for other people or the world to figure out, to continue my car analogy, like I'm just so ready for this car situation to be over so that I can start like repressing it and just remembering the good part of the vacation, right?
Right.
Like, because it was so good, the parts that we had. And actually some of it was good because of not having a car for the large majority of the vacation.
And
It really forced some family time.
right. And by repressing, Tova obviously means dealing with and letting go of those unfortunate moments.
Yes, I'm actively dealing with them. So I'm just ready to like let go of them, but I can't let go of them until I stop driving a rental car and get my
Yes,
car
yes.
back. Yeah, so you were right. Repressing might not be the right term, but letting go of those experiences so that we can move on
Yeah.
to the rest, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
interesting because we're going to be talking about that a lot in the next season, but I'll save that for another day.
Yes, definitely. So, if you haven't figured it out entirely today, we are talking about how to kind of think about self care and boundaries with respect to the busyness in your life and what all of that has to do with your own feelings of self worth. And, we talked about this kind of at length at the beginning of the season. And what I mean is, Tova and I talked privately about this because we do think it's really important to understand that self worth stems from your inside, right? And we've talked about
Mm.
that publicly at length, that self-worth is something, that you inherently get to have because you are worthy as a human being just by virtue of existing, that you don't have to do anything, that there's no litmus test, there's no written test, there's nothing you have to do. You just are worthy because you exist, and that's it. Like that's the whole sentence. But on the flip side of that, like we're all sort of conditioned to unlearn. Is that a word? I'm making it a word. Andrew will tell me later. It's that, you know, we're conditioned to unlearn that as kids, right? Like that we have to either prove ourselves by achieving academically or athletically or socially or in some way, form, or another, that we are worthwhile as people by doing something or becoming something or checking off our lists or, you know, some other way that we deserve to be loved or we deserve to be paid attention to or whatever it is that we're seeking. We deserve to get it because we've done something for it. And so we have to unlearn that in a lot of ways. I mean, some of us are more fortunate than others in that we don't get us pulled into that belief system. But I don't know many people who haven't experienced that at one point or another in their lives. And so unlearning that takes active practice. So you have to work at it. And you have to teach, you know, if you're a parent, you have to really teach your children not to fall into that trap because society sort of pushes it on them, right? And schools are set up to teach kids that, whether it's intentional or not. It's just how schools are set up. And so, what we want to talk about today is setting boundaries, which is one of my favorite topics, although very hard to do. And we want to talk about self care and what self care really means. And I know we've talked about this before, but we think it's so important that we just want to keep reiterating what self care really is and what it looks
Mhm.
like, what it feels like, and how important it is for people to engage in self care in a meaningful way, particularly women, and particularly, you know, right now in this sort of transition time. So we're going to take a quick break because we're trying to be better about
We're
taking
setting
our
boundaries with
setting
ourselves.
boundaries and taking breaks on time. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll do some definitions like we like to do, and we'll dive right into our topic. So we'll be right back, everyone. Hey Tova, you know what I love?
Coffee, definitions, uninterrupted reading time.
Okay, all of those things are true, but I also love maps.
As in Siri, take me to the beach.
Yeah. Also, as in, who am I really and who do I want to be?
Yeah, I figured that's what you meant, but I also have the beach on my mind. So,
Well, we were talking about things we love, so that definitely makes sense. But the map I was thinking about is our Defining You course.
yes, we put together defining you as a way to map where you are and how you want to live your life.
So true. So many people struggle to find their purpose in a busy and noisy world.
That's why we made Defining You, our course meant to guide you to creating your own mission statement.
And there's good news. You can get it now on teachable.com. Find the link on our website at goboldlyinitiative.com/courses, or check out the link on our Instagram bio at Go Boldly Together.
We can't wait to see you there. Now, let's head back to the show.
All right, so welcome back. And as we were saying before the break, we're going to do our favorite and set some definitions. Which,
I know, so Riley, you did the research for this, and I really like some of the definitions. So I'm excited to hear them again.
excellent. Well, and I always enjoy when Tova likes my research because that means I've done an extra good time or extra good job. Apparently, I can't talk today. All right, so this is one of the definitions I came up with, or I didn't come up with it, someone else did, and I found it. And you can find all of the research in the show notes just as a reminder. But what I found for healthy boundaries is that a person with healthy boundaries understands that making their expectations clear helps in two ways, and that it establishes what behavior you will accept from other people, and that it establishes what behavior other people can expect from you. So that's pretty basic, pretty clear definition, right? Um, and so, in setting a boundary or in maintaining a healthy boundary, you're basically establishing, you know, who you are in the world and how you expect the world to treat you. And in doing that, you allow yourself to create a world that is comfortable for you, and not comfortable in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to, sit on the couch and eat potato chips and be comfortable. Like, which is fine, by the way. I've done that and it's great. But like, in the sense that this is a place where I feel like I'm being respected, I'm respecting the world, this is how I want to live my life. This is a good balance for me. That that kind of comfort,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like the definition mentions, to me, the biggest boundaries in my life are ones that I set for myself. Um, I know we've talked about this a lot too, but like so many times when we hear the word boundaries, we think about as they go towards other people and how they set those boundaries or we set them for other people. But I think like the definition implies, like, it's about setting that boundaries to say, this is who I am, this is how I'm going to live my life. And then the decisions you make are sort of stemming out of that personal boundaries that you're setting. And sometimes it does mean telling someone else no, or yes, or I don't want to do that, or I do want to do that. But it really comes from that place of establishing boundaries within who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that completely changed my understanding, expectation, experience of boundary setting is when I started to look at boundaries as a form of self care
Yeah.
and understood that boundaries are about taking care of myself and taking care of the people in my life, as opposed to boundaries being something like discipline, punishment, um, anything punitive like that.
Right.
And which is how boundaries are described a lot of times, by, or I would say mislabeled a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so once you understand and accept that boundaries are about self care, it becomes a lot easier to set them, right? Because who doesn't want to take care of themselves? Like,
Right. And I think also it's important when 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 a lot of people talk about self-care, and I know we're getting to the self-care definition momentarily, but when people talk about self-care, getting your nails done or whatever could be like thrown out as an option. But maybe it's setting a boundary that you are going to be doing something important to you every week that's taking care of your physical body, that makes you feel good about yourself. If you're typing all day or using your hands, you see your hands all day. And so maybe having a manicure really brings you joy and makes
right,
you feel good. And so the boundary you're setting is saying, I don't care what other people think. I'm going to put this in my budget. I'm going to make sure this happens. I'm going to make sure the time is set aside because this is important to me. And so the outward is, oh, she gets her nails done every 2 weeks. The inward is, I am taking up space in my life. I am setting aside time, and you have set these personal boundaries for yourself.
right. And I think it's the most important aspect of, well, we'll get to the definition of self care in a second. We're jumping ahead. First, I just want to list a few types of boundaries so that everyone
Mm,
understands everyone who's listening understands that boundaries come in all different shapes and sizes. Boundaries are like as unique as humans, right? There's emotional boundaries, there are sexual boundaries, there's physical boundaries, energetic, intellectual, financial, and then there's self boundaries, which I think are some of the most important. And those are boundaries that you set with your own behavior, right? Like, those are impulse control type boundaries, which I certainly struggle with sometimes. Those are the boundaries we keep talking about, like the things you set around your own decisions, your own behaviors, your own choices in life. And
mhm.
so, excuse me, if you have any questions about those, obviously reach out to us. We're happy to, talk more about them with you. But those are just some of the categories of boundaries that you can set in your life or that other people will set with you that that impact, how we all relate to each other. Boundaries are about relationships. But moving on to the definition of self care, which does obviously, as we've said, encompass boundaries. The definition that I did find about self care that I think really covers what we are talking about is that self care has been defined as a multidimensional, multifaceted process of purposeful engagement and strategies that promote healthy functioning and enhance well being. Essentially, the term describes a conscious act a person takes in order to promote their own physical, mental, and emotional health. So that could be, as Tova was saying, maybe you do get your nails done every 2 weeks, and that does promote your mental well-being. Perhaps you were in a financially abusive relationship for 10 years and you're out of it, and that in that relationship you weren't ever allowed to spend any money on yourself, and now you are. And this is one of the ways you're healing from that process. There are so many different aspects that go into self care that it
Mm-hmm.
has to be individualized for you. It has to apply to you directly, not to, your neighbor who goes and gets spa treatments every 2 weeks, because you don't know why your neighbor does that.
Right.
They have their own story, their own life experience that is driving them to do that. And so, whatever the self care experience is for you, is about you, and that's why we like this definition, and that's why we're focusing on this for today.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying, like self-care is different for every person, and there's really, yeah, I don't want to say as long as it's healthy, there's no wrong way to self-care. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you're actually following that definition of self-care, then there isn't a wrong way to self-care, right? Because if you're doing something harmful to yourself, then it's not truly self-care.
Right.
So I feel comfortable saying that there's really no wrong way to self-care, right? It can mean hanging out with people, it can mean not hanging out with people. It's the whole span, and it, like you said, it depends on who you are. But as we spent this whole season talking about busyness and then talking to a lot of women, I think we can see that A, self-care looks totally different for so many different people, and B, it's something that people actively have to like consciously do. Like it will not sort of happen on its own. I think once you get into habits or certain lifestyles where you've set this expectation for yourself, then certain parts of self care will actually happen organically. Like maybe book club is self care for you. So once you're used to going to book club, then then it happens naturally. But I think that after the conversations that we had, it's an important reminder that we talked to some incredibly wonderful and accomplished women, and this was a part that I think they all struggled with.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is universal, particularly as women, although, I even just in talking with my husband, I know he struggles with this too, is allowing yourself to take the time for yourself, especially when you have a family, or young kids or kids at all. Allowing yourself the freedom to take the time to do something that is about and for
Yeah.
yourself. That is something that is good for you. It's good for your family. It's good for the people who love you. It's all good in general. But when you're trying to make the decision to do it, it's hard to see the end result, right? Because
Well,
you're,
yeah.
you're in the mix of it and you're feeling like, oh my goodness, if I take this hour, the laundry's not going to get done. I'm not going to have a dinner made, or I'm not going to get my brief written, or like whatever it is that you feel like you have to do at that moment isn't going to
Yeah.
happen. And so it's very hard to actually grant yourself that hour of time. On the flip side of that, of course, is if you actually do grant yourself that hour a week or whatever it is, then you obviously get so much more mental and emotional space to function in the world, that you're a much nicer, happier, healthier human, and everything else gets better.
Well, and I think this, we talked about how, gosh, wait, kind of at the beginning of the season, we talked about how there are these limits to productivity,
Mm-hmm.
like somebody who sits down for 6 hours versus somebody who sits down for 2 hours, takes a break, does something else, 2 hours, takes a break. And then that, winds up to 6 hours. The person who actually took the breaks, and everyone has a different threshold, right? Of like how much they can get done. But I'm guessing what your threshold is actually lower than what you think it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all like, no, I can totally power through for 3 hours and I'm super efficient. No, probably not. Like the average person is like like 90 minutes.
Right.
So I think that, like you were saying, you are actually probably more productive, and you shouldn't do self-care just for productivity, but like you said, you're happier, you're more productive. Like taking time for yourself does not mean that you will actually get less done. And I think that's important. I also agree and want to reiterate what you said, that men also, I think, struggle with self-care. Because depending on what they're doing, it's not necessarily filling some of the needs that they need to be met. Like they can take time on their own, but that might not actually be doing what self-care needs to be doing.
Yeah.
But I will say that women are more likely to say, well, I went grocery shopping by myself and I grabbed myself a
Yes.
Starbucks,
Yes.
or I took a nice long shower by myself. Taking a shower by yourself is hygiene,
Right.
not self-care.
Not self care.
Now, if you throw in one of those cool, like aromatherapy things, if you're listening to some nice music, it can be a very enjoyable hygienic experience. And I encourage, actually, I think it's really actually important to, if you like listening to podcasts, do the dishes while you listen to a podcast. If you like your shower to be a little longer, and if you are, buying aromatherapy for the shower, do things that actually make all other parts of your life more enjoyable, because you will we all benefit from that. It's good for all of us. But doing the dishes, listening to podcasts, just because I like listening to podcasts, doesn't make it self-care. I'm
No.
still doing the dishes. You're still going the grocery shopping, even if you grab a Starbucks, and you're still just taking care of personal hygiene if you throw some aromatherapy into your shower.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts that I want to add to that just to amplify what you're saying. One is you cannot multitask your way into self care. Just to like paraphrase what you said, I think.
Yeah.
Like you can't multitask. It just that's not how it works. And distraction is not self-care.
Right.
So if you are scrolling social media, that is not self-care. It doesn't matter how much you enjoy TikTok. It doesn't matter how much you enjoy laughing at funny cat videos that it
I
is
might push back a little bit on that, but
I
yes, I
know
hear
you
what you're
will,
saying.
but it's not self care.
Yeah.
It's not because you're still engaged in something that is not taking care of your internal needs, right? Like it may not even be taking care of your external needs, to be honest. Um, I just, I'm not many people are going to convince me otherwise. Um, and it's not even just because I don't enjoy doing it myself. Because I like dance videos. Like my kid and I will watch dance videos and she'll do the dances. But um, self care is something that is meaningful for you, right? Like
Right.
there's got to be meaning attached to it in some way. And it is meant to not it doesn't have to be like some major transformation in your life, but it does have to have a meaning to you. So that's why when we tell you the story about getting your nails done, it's not self-care unless it's attached to a purpose in your life, right? Like unless you look at your nails every 2 weeks and you're like and you need to like and it actually impacts your life in some way, right? And there's nothing wrong with getting your nails done. Just to clarify, like I like having nice fingernails, by the way. Like that's awesome. And if everyone out there is doing it, that's great. That doesn't make it self care. Um,
Right. Because I
so
think, I think a lot of it goes to why you're doing something.
yeah,
So, like, loads of people get their nails done because they feel like they have to for their job or for
sure,
their status or stature or whatever. Like,
right,
there's a variety of reasons that they do it. It wouldn't be self care if you're doing it for those reasons.
right. And if you just want your nails to look nice, that's great. That's I'm all for it. That's awesome. If
Right.
I'm not judging that at all. I
Well,
love to have my nails look nice, but that still doesn't make it self care.
it's also, I think I'm laughing because like they once again, a meme, tweet, whatever, like you're a mom when you find getting your eyebrows waxed to be relaxing. Like, and I have literally fallen asleep at the dentist
Yep.
and I have felt incredibly relaxed getting my eyebrows waxed.
Right.
And the point is like they're pouring hot wax at your eyes. Like but you're a mom and you're like, I'm all by myself.
Nobody can
And
walk in.
I talk about the need for time. I guess I was making my neighbors, um, it doesn't matter. I was making them shepherd's pie because they just had babies. So I was making them like food. And I cut myself on a hand blender and I had to go to the hospital. And I had two kids at home, maybe three, to be perfectly honest. No, just two kids. And I drove myself because I didn't want to have to take the kids to the hospital. I'm not really sure that was the best idea, but I think I talked on the phone to a friend the whole time just in case I like passed out. I'm not sure what she would have done from Maryland, but nonetheless, I thought that was a good plan. Anyway, it was like 5:30, and I got to hang out in an ER for like 3 hours. I had my own room. I had a warm blanket. I got to watch TV, and I found it incredibly relaxing.
Right.
Now, I still have nerve issue on that finger. So I'm not saying it was worth it, but if you're like, oh, I went to the ER and I had a relaxing time, that is a good indication that perhaps, and maybe this is our journal entry. Like if you're jealous of the time that Tova got to spend 3 hours during the busiest time of night, getting her finger stitched up, it is time to evaluate how much time you spend on self-care
Yeah.
and setting boundaries.
And setting boundaries. Saying no.
So let's take a quick break
Yeah.
since we are setting boundaries with ourselves about taking breaks, and we will come back and talk about more stuff. Know what I really love to do?
Take baths, go for walks, read, drink margaritas, hike.
Yeah, not what I was referring to. We're recording a commercial right now.
I do, but I'm thinking outside the box, being adaptable.
As I was saying, what I love to do is host our live monthly workshops.
Oh, right. That's what we were talking about. Me too. They are a lot of fun to put together and host every month. And we can bring margaritas, so.
Join us for live conversation as we get a bit deeper into topics near and dear to our hearts. We go through everything from self-care to setting boundaries.
We share coaching tips, practical advice, and take questions from the audience. It's a whole lot of fun.
Sign up for our newsletter today at goboldlyinitiative.com/contact to make sure you hear about all the upcoming Go Boldly workshops.
You definitely don't want to miss out. Now, back to that show.
Okay, welcome back. As I saw the actual stopwatch, I was like, oh, we actually didn't do a great job setting boundaries there. But I think that as I read like some of the research and I'm thinking about boundaries and how it works with self-care, I do want to emphasize that a boundary can be saying yes more. And it also can be saying no more. And it can be figuring out what that looks like in your life. And I think there's two books, and I haven't read the first one in a long time, but that I've really enjoyed, and I've talked about the second one, but The Happiness Project, where Gretchen Rubin, I don't remember how it worked essentially, but she each month had a different focus, and it was really interesting because it allowed her, I mean, she basically, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, but she did research on like what makes a person happy. And then she figured out what she needed to do each like month to focus on that particular area. And then it got kind of accumulative. And I think what made it interesting was, if I remember correctly, and now I'm kind of like, oh, I really want to re-listen to that book. There were things that were sort of, this is what you need to do to be happy kind of things that did not work for her. and like she did not want to participate in, and she figured that out. So in that case, saying no was setting it like was self-care. But she went through the experience to figure it out, because I think a lot of us don't spend that time being introspective enough to figure out what actually where we need to set the boundaries and how we need to set the boundaries. um we kind of wait until like uh there's a breaking point, and then it's just like, no, 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 I can't do anything anymore, I'm done, I can't do it anymore. And then that lasts for like 2 weeks, and you're like, oh yeah, no, I'll volunteer for that, that sounds great. Um and then thinking of the book The Year of Yes, where I know I talk about that a lot, in that case she had put up walls and so many boundaries, but they weren't serving her, they weren't protecting her. And then there were other parts of her life, and Shonda Rhimes, I'm just, referring to her as like, my buddy Shonda, um, where she had said yes too much, right? So the boundaries once again weren't serving her. They were protecting her from things that she actually didn't need to be protected from. And they were keeping her open. They were a sieve in other cases. And so I think that this concept of boundaries being self-care, yes, sometimes it does mean cutting off a toxic person in your life. That can be an incredibly deep and strong form of self-care and setting boundaries. But a lot of times it's less clear where the boundary needs to be and what your boundaries need to be. And you need to, part of it is figuring out where it is and what you need to do.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is figuring out how to even set a boundary, right? So once you figure out kind of what you want to set a boundary about, right? When you've had that conversation with yourself, because it is, like Tova was saying, a conversation that sort of happens internally and requires some time spent thinking about who you are and what you are and how you how you want to interact with the world,
Right.
which, as we've talked about at length, requires listening to your inner voice. um, and if you're struggling with that, I think we can repost it, but we have an email course that you can sign up for. It's free. It will help you get started on that process. But your inner voice is really the key to this, to most of the most of the things we talk about, I think.
Yeah.
um, but it's the key to the process in being able to hear your own sort of inner core thoughts, and your inner core guidelines of who you are and who you want to be in the world will help you start to set those boundaries. So there's a couple like core tenets, I guess is what I would call them, and in setting boundaries. And if you've never really set any boundaries with people before, this will help, because sometimes I say this to people like about setting boundaries, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what does that even mean? I think everyone has set boundaries before, but maybe they don't even realize they're doing it, right? Like,
Right.
we don't, sometimes Tova and I forget that other people don't have these conversations all day long.
Ad nauseum. Yeah.
Right? Like, that they don't completely geek out over the words like boundaries in the way that we do. So what I would suggest is, first of all, just visualize and name your limits, right? Like, imagine it in your mind as an actual physical boundary. Say if you're at work and there's like there's a colleague who is constantly trying to give you their work to do, and you're like, you just can't take any more of that, and it's not in your job description, you shouldn't be taking on their work. You can visualize a physical boundary between you and that person, and then you can name that limit, and you can do it in a completely tactful, acceptable way. You don't have to be like, get out of here, John. I'm never doing your work again and I hate you, right? Like, it doesn't have to come out in this mean, awful
Right.
way. It can be like, John, I appreciate you asking me to help you. I think it's great that you think I'm good at this, but I'm really busy right now with my own work. Maybe I can help you another time, right?
Well, and just two things really quickly. When you said physical boundary, I immediately thought of kids with like the cereal boxes around them. Like, no, I do not want to engage with you. I have
Right.
these cereal boxes up
Yeah.
protecting me. But also, you know, there's been some articles recently on this concept of quiet quitting,
Mm,
which means essentially people at work are starting to set boundaries
hmm.
and be like, oh, so you're not paying me more, but you're asking me to do more. And now I'm doing Sheila's work as well. And I don't know what Sheila's doing, but it's not work. And also, you want me to plan things that aren't in my job description. And like, listen, I love a Thanksgiving potluck at work as much as the next person. And I recognize that someone has to put up the sign up sheet. But like, quiet quitting is not quitting. It's people being like, I have boundaries and
Right.
this is my job. This is not my life. And so I am going to set those boundaries appropriately, kindly, and respectfully. And if you want to change my job description to include more things and pay me more and give me the tools to achieve those things, awesome.
Yeah.
But if you're just giving me stuff to do, not awesome.
Yeah. And we can negotiate terms over that, right?
Right.
Like it's
Let's
not
have a
just
conversation about it.
yes. So visualize and name your limits. Openly communicate your limits, right? You have to be open about your limits. You can't assume people are going to just guess what your limits are. You have to be willing to state them out loud. This is adulting. Reiterate, and
Ugh.
I know that's a fair sigh. Reiterate and uphold your boundaries, right? So you can't just say it once. Imagine you're talking to your 5-year-old, right? You've got to say it over and over and over again. Because generally speaking, when we create a boundary, we are creating it around something that we've let go on for quite some time. So we are changing a behavior pattern. That means we have to do it over and over again until the behavior pattern changes. That may not feel great.
Yeah.
You may wish it were not the case, but it is. Don't
This
be
is
afraid.
also, oh,
Oh,
sorry.
no,
I'm
go
going to say
ahead.
this is changing your own behavior pattern as
Yep.
much as somebody else's.
Yeah.
It's just,
So this all applies to setting limits with yourself
yeah.
and setting boundaries with yourself. So even if there is nobody else involved in this conversation, you can still visualize and name your limits. You can still openly communicate your boundaries, reiterate and uphold your boundaries with yourself. So that may feel weird. You may be doing it into a mirror. You may just be saying it out loud into the ether. Um, but it's still worthwhile to do it because
Yeah.
putting it out there makes it far more real than if you're just sort of mumbling it into your own brain. I'm making hand motions like people who are not
Well,
watching us on YouTube can see me.
I'm laughing because so I had this experience. I know every story goes back to the car, and until I get my car back, it
That's how
will
it's going to be.
continue to
I
go
know.
back to the car. But the first mechanic, and yes, there's been more than one, and I have a sneaky suspicion there's going to be more than two. But the first mechanic, I was texting with his wife. She was the go between, and beyond the go between, she worked the front desk. She had like a job as related to the auto mechanic, and basically at some point it was decided that like she couldn't help, like they couldn't help, and from a lack of time, not a lack of ability. And she said, he really is a good mechanic. And I said something of like, yep, nope, I just need to make sure that if I'm spending all this money, it's actually fixing the problem, kind of thing. And then I realized, so I was sitting on the beach. As I was having these text conversations. I was watching my kids play in the water. And I was really upset that this stranger who I've had knew for a day, do not even know her name, at no point knew her name, um, and had only text messages interactions, was going to be upset with me. And like, I was very upset that she was upset. And I had to sit there and give myself a pep talk, a hardcore pep talk about how I'm not in charge of her feelings. I was advocating for myself to make sure that they didn't do work that I didn't need to be done. And I had to not let myself send more texts of like contrition or apology or whatever nonsense I planned on sending to her, because she probably at this point, 3 weeks later, has no recollection of this experience at all. Has had, and probably at the time, because text messaging is a horrible form of communication, despite my enjoyment of doing it, probably wasn't even upset. But like, I was carrying with me so much stress, and I had to like work my way through it. So the point of this is me setting that boundary was me setting it with myself and just not sending a text. So from the outside world, It's like, hey, John, I don't have time to do the sign up right now for the potluck. We need to ask somebody else. I'm really busy. Internally, it could be like, oh my God, I've done it every time. What if nobody does it? What if we don't have a potluck and it's all my fault? Like you, so just so that you know that a lot of times setting a boundary externally can be pretty like, no, thank you. And internally, it's like so much more is happening. So it's just like a word of caution.
Yeah. And that's
Like,
such a good example too, like of how it actually looks outside. On the outside is very like blah, right? That
yeah.
it's just kind of whatever.
And like, depending on who you're setting the boundary with, or that whether there is an outward experience, maybe you are explaining, like, I mean, you and I have had times where we've actually talked about setting boundaries with each other, but they were internal boundaries, and we were like, so I really need to set this boundary for myself. And because that's how we communicate with each
Yeah.
other. But like, for the most part, other people don't care.
Right.
Like,
That
they
might
just
be
don't
unique to us
care.
though.
Well, yeah.
That might be special
but
for us.
but I can see that there could be, if you're setting a boundary within a family, it might
Yeah.
require a longer conversation.
Yep.
But most of the time, it's just a no, thank you. Yes, please.
Right.
That's it.
Right. So, when we talk, why, I guess that this all boils down to like, why are we even talking about this, right? Like, why does this belong in the season about self worth and busyness? And I mean, to us, it's obvious, of course, because we put it here. Uh, but
True,
but
true.
the reason that we wanted to have this conversation is that in order to get a handle on your busyness and your overwhelm and your feelings of not being worthy and not worthwhile, and sort of dealing with that mess and that mix up and mixture of ick. That's
Hmm.
my new term for it, mixture
I
of
like
ick.
it.
Is setting some boundaries and allowing yourself to wade through the busyness of your life and figure out what actually matters and prioritize things, and being able to allow yourself the space that you need to actually function without the busyness, to live a life that is not consumed by other people's urgency, right? Other people's need for you to prove yourself, to be something that you don't need to be. And by setting boundaries within yourself and with the rest of the world, you can start weeding out the excess. You can start weeding out the things that don't actually matter to you, and you can start living the life that you want to be living. And it's not some like overnight magic bean, right? That's not how it works. But you can start to figure things out to make it less overwhelming and less full of the things that you don't want to be saturated by. And so that's why this episode was so important to us to have this conversation. And when doing the research and looking at why boundaries and self care matter, one of the things that kept coming up is that they give you this sense of agency and sovereignty over your own decisions. And
Right.
I think that's the crux of it, right? They help you have lower stress levels, but higher self-esteem. You're prioritizing your own well-being. And as a parent or as a friend, as a child of, you know, somebody, that will help you be in a better relationship with whoever you want to be in relationship with, whether it's, a friendship, a parent-child relationship, or otherwise. Um, the healthier you are, the healthier your relationships are going to be.
Well, and we talked all season about how busyness and busy is not the same thing.
Right.
If you are um an active person, I was going to say working, but you could be working in the home, working outside of the home, working for pay, not working for pay, whatever it is that you're doing. And if you have children, And if you have responsibilities like you're describing to other members of your family and friends, and those responsibilities are not necessarily like I get them their groceries, but like I have a relationship with these people, um, you are going to be busy. That is inevitable. But setting boundaries and making sure you are practicing self care that we've defined it as will allow you to keep the busyness away. Not all day, not every day, but more often,
Right.
right? And we said right at the very beginning, we could see we were going to say no a lot more than we, were saying yeah. Like we realized that we were going to personally start saying no more. Um, and it's funny, I recently found out that I had signed up for a bunch of stuff, and I think it was before this season. And now I'm like, really? Tova before season 6? What were you thinking? Why did you sign up for these things? Huh? So I'm learning. It has been a learning curve, but like I said, we're all going to be busy because life is,
Yeah.
busy. You talk to people who are retired who like are not actively working and they're busy. Like it's just life is busy. We're
Right.
talking about, but there are also people who aren't busy who have the feeling of busyness. And so this is where it's so important to bring that sense of boundary setting and self-care to to your life.
Yeah. So I think this brings us to the end of our season 6, which is a little hard to believe, but we did it.
It has to end sometime.
It does. The party's over. Um, so with that, I guess we'll move to homework. And I'll be honest with you guys, I hadn't figured out the homework until we started recording. So Tova gave us a good idea for a journal prompt, as we like to give you. But this week, what we're going to have you guys do is surprise practice some boundary setting, which makes sense,
Yep.
obviously, given what we've been talking about. So, what we'd like for you to do is to visualize and name your limits, right? So think about what kind of boundaries you have in your life and what kind of limits you've set so far, right? Make a list, brainstorm, I think is probably the best way to go for this process. Put them in your journal, or if you don't have a journal, just grab a piece of paper. You don't have to have anything special for this project. And write down a list of where you have set boundaries in your life. And they don't have to be huge boundaries. They could be things like I take 5 minutes to have my coffee in the morning before I talk to anyone because I don't like talking when I first wake up. It could be, and Tova's laughing because I am actually describing one of my own boundaries.
Yes.
Um, it could be anything. Just make a list of some of the boundaries that you've set for yourself, and then go through the process that we talked about before. Picture it as a visual, physical boundary. Make a plan for how you could set and communicate that limit to the people around you in a kind and positive way, and then practice it. Um, if there are other boundaries that you would like to set and you haven't, add those to the list and figure out how you're going to start communicating those with the people that you need to communicate them with, unless, including yourself, right? If it's a boundary with yourself, write it down. If it's a boundary with somebody else, write that down too. Don't overwhelm yourself with a list of 50. Like, if this is the start, aim for 5. Um, Sometimes when I was first starting out in this process, however long ago, I would try to do too much at once, and that is not a good way to start. So give that a shot, see what happens. If you have any struggles, let us know. Reach out to us. We're available on social media. You can email us. You can send us a message through our website. Whatever works for you works for us. We would love to hear how it's going. And also, if you have ideas for self care, I would suggest you think about journaling those out as well. If you're not participating in any kind of self care, figure out where you can fit it in during your week. See how you can squeeze in 30 minutes. We talked about an hour before. I would suggest if you're not doing any, you start with 30 minutes and build up to an hour. Figure out what self-care is most important to you. Maybe it's a walk in nature. Maybe it's a book that you feel like you really want to read at a coffee shop for 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't know, maybe it's a dance party in your room with the door locked so that the kids can't get to you. Whatever it is that feels replenishing for you, start making a list of what that might be and figure out the 30 minutes of the week that you can set aside, and then set a boundary around that. So put that in your journal and let us know how all of it goes. And we will be back next week with a mini interim season for you. And until then, we hope you have a good week, and we will talk to you all soon.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.